Hi everyone, and happy Wednesday. So here I am for a second week in a row coming in front of the camera, which is not my usual thing or not really my comfort zone. But I wanted to chat about something that sort of contradicts, if you will, something I've said on many occasions in probably most of my videos, if not all of my videos. So I want to talk to you about the one and only rule I think is important to follow in creativity. So you're probably wondering, what is that and why all of a sudden are there any rules? Because really, I prefer not to have rules when it comes to creativity. I find rules to be very hindering. But in this case, this particular rule that I was reminded of not all that long ago, and actually it's a rule that I sort of have been playing in my head kind of as a mantra for quite a long time, but I've never really considered it as a rule until I was reminded of it. So a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to one of my favorite audiobooks, The Power of Intention by one of my favorite authors, Dr. Wayne Dyer. And in his book, he recounted a story about this rule called Rule Number 6. And I giggled because I never really thought of it as a rule, but it was just kind of something I did. And I think it's kind of a neat rule. So I'll tell you the story and I'll let you judge for yourself whether or not this rule could be applicable to you. So as Dr. Dyer recounts this story, it goes like this. There are these two prime ministers sitting in a meeting room discussing legislature and laws and all this stuff, and they're very busy in their work. And all of a sudden, a constituent runs into the meeting room ranting and raving and is very frantic and takes the two prime ministers' attention. And the prime minister from the country where they are simply interrupts the person and says, "Paul, please kindly remember rule number 6. All of a sudden, Paul calms down and he excuses himself and walks away. So the two prime ministers keep at their work and they're working along, and all of a sudden, another person comes into a room ranting and raving about something else. And again, the first prime minister says, "Marie, kindly remember rule number 6. Marie calms down, apologizes, and walks away. So after this happens for a third time, the visiting prime minister looks at the other prime minister and says, "I am completely astonished. I have never seen anything like this before. Please, could you share with me the secret of rule number 6? And the prime minister chuckles and said, "Well, it's actually very simple. Yes, I can definitely share it with you. The rule is simply this: don't take yourself so darn seriously." So the visiting prime minister chuckles and says, yes, that's a very good rule. And then he keeps pondering it and he said, "Well, please do tell me, what are the other rules? If this is rule number 6, what are the other rules?" And the first prime minister says, "There are no other rules." So when I find myself in my creative process and I start to feel either stressed out because I don't think the painting is going as well as I would hope it would be going, or I'm disappointed with my results, or I'm putting pressure on myself to achieve a certain result, I hear this little mantra playing in my head: don't take yourself too seriously. I don't know, I feel like this is a rule that could apply for just about anything, but I think for me in particular, it really applies to the creative process, because when I take myself too seriously in my creative process, it seems to all go down the hill because I'm not having fun. I'm feeling stressed. I'm putting pressure on myself to achieve some maybe unrealistic goal, or I'm putting pressure on myself to do something based on the perception that maybe other people want me to do a certain thing, or that there are expectations that I need to meet. And that just takes all the fun out of the creative process. So rule number 6, don't take yourself so darn seriously. For me implies because it keeps my process more light, it keeps my process more relaxing, and it definitely keeps my process more fun. And when I have a process that's more light, more relaxing, and more fun, guess what? I also have a process that's more successful. It's really that simple. I mean, and it's funny because I've been kind of singing this mantra in my head because, you know, as a YouTube content creator, there's a lot for me to think about. I don't get paid unless I create content that people want to watch. I don't get paid a lot. Even if I do create content that people want to watch. So why am I taking myself so seriously? Taking myself so seriously is not really helping in my process. Not in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, I just thought it'd be nice for me to share this with you because I often will get messages from people who are saying, you know, I'm really trying to do what you're doing, but I'm having a really hard time and it doesn't seem to ever work out. The whole idea is to have fun, because if we put too much pressure on ourselves to make our creativity a certain something based on whatever expectation, whether it be that we are putting very high expectations on ourselves or we think other people are putting high expectations on us, the creative process can't be creative. And I know that might sound really weird for me to say that, but creativity in itself is about inspiration. It's about imagination. It's about curiosity. It's about exploring. It's about having fun and trying things. That is creative. But when we're putting pressure on ourselves to make it be something else, then it becomes very rigid and it becomes very hard for us to get in touch with our intuition, like I was talking about last week. And then the process just kind of falls apart. So that for me is why I love this rule, if you want to call it a rule. For me, it's more of a mantra than it really is a rule. For me, it's definitely helpful. And it's really, like, it's funny that it's even called a rule, because I always say there are no rules to the creative process. I really strongly believe that the less pressure I put on myself to do things a certain way, the better things go. And so I've sort of been doing this for a long time and not really thinking about it too much, except for when I do start to take myself seriously. That's when that little voice comes in, and maybe it's Wayne Dyer's voice, I don't know. It comes in and says, you know, don't take yourself so seriously, just have fun, let go and go with the flow. So anyway, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear you tell me, is this something that you've done in your creative process? Is this something that you apply in your life, and how does it work for you? And is this something you've never heard of before? And is it something that could be helpful to you? I'd love to know. Thank you for listening. Now it's time for us to move on to the fun part of this video, which is my new little project, my new little art project that I'm trying not to take myself too seriously on. Anyway, thank you again for watching. For this week's art project, I'm going to be working on a little geologic abstract, and I'll be very upfront with you that this little painting process was actually filmed a couple of months ago, right after my move, at a time when I was really tired, and I do notice that when I get really tired, things do seem to get a whole lot more serious for me. So I was taking myself so seriously that I filmed the whole thing and decided I didn't want to post it on YouTube because it just didn't feel good enough for me. And then about a week ago, I was going through my paintings and I came across this little painting again, and I thought, wow, I really like this little painting. Why did I never post this on YouTube? Again, because I was taking myself way too seriously at the time. And I just couldn't, I was so tired. I couldn't not take myself seriously. I felt like it just wasn't meeting the kind of quality I wanted to put out there. Yeah, I again, I was taking myself pretty seriously. So having looked at the little painting again and I really love it. I've decided that yes, I'm going to be posting it on YouTube this week. And I'm doing so to relieve myself of the pressure of the expectations that I put on my shoulders, the expectations that come hugely from me, and also the expectations that I perceive are coming from other people. And, I'm sure there are expectations out there that are not mine, but I want to release myself from all that. And I like this little painting, so I've decided to put it out there. I was inspired to create this little painting by icicles. And you've probably noticed that when, my creativity sort of follows the seasons. And of course, it's winter and we were starting to have snow and ice. And I love what nature gives us every single day. If you go outside and you look around you, there is so much to be inspired by. And so I was looking at icicles and I thought they looked so pretty. And I thought, can I create some kind of little abstract painting to represent icicles? And this is how this whole painting process started. When I'm working on an abstract painting where I have a bit of an idea in mind of what I would like it to represent, even though it's, if it's abstract artwork, it's not going to look exactly, of course, like the thing I want it to represent. Is an abstract representation. I don't always know exactly how it's going to go or how I'm going to make it happen, but I try to give myself as much freedom as possible to just go with the flow and explore whatever ideas come to mind. And so that's exactly what I did with this process. I worked very intuitively to sort of represent the shapes of icicles, but not necessarily to replicate icicles exactly as they are. I would, there may be a way to do that, but for me it wouldn't be all that much fun to try and recreate something that I already find really perfect. Like icicles are perfect exactly as they are. And there could be maybe a nice challenge in trying to replicate that, but for me, that's not where the fun lies. The fun lies in me trying to find a way to represent this in an abstract, non-realistic way. For me, that's way more fun. And for me, that's also way more liberating because there are no pressures for it to look exactly like the thing I'm trying to make it look like. It is just so much better. So I started my process doing the same thing I usually do. I put a light wash of color on the background because I was going to be working with the idea of icicles. I tried to stick with the blues because these are the colors that for me represent the cold, the snow, the ice. And then I added salt. I love working with salt. I love the textures that it creates. And so I'm just slowly but surely building up my layers of color. I'm building up my textures using some salt. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to start working on like the creation of my icicles. And we'll see how they go. These initial marks and layers of color that I added may or may not show in the final result, but what they do for me at this point in the process is help sort of guide me as to what I want to draw attention to. And so I created these interesting looking marks that for me are sort of reminiscent of icicles as I see them falling from a roof line, let's say. And I'm using my fountain pen now to draw attention to making these forms a little bit more concrete. But again, it's going to be more abstract than realistic. And so I'm really giving myself a lot of liberty here to explore different ideas and see how I can sort of bring this idea about in an interesting way. I really like the addition of the horizontal lines in between my icicles. I find that it helps to sort of push those areas of the painting into the background where I really feel like it needs to be. And at the same time, when I'm looking at my icicle or my little ice formations, my abstract ice, it feels a little bit too plain. And so I hand created a bit of a grid using my ruler and fine tip pen. And I feel like I need to make my quote unquote icicles a little bit more interesting. Yes, they're abstract. Maybe right now they look more like the types of icicles you would find outside, even though they don't look exactly like them. I think they look a little bit too much like reality, and I don't really want that. And so I want to make these little ice formations look more interesting. So I'm going to start by adding some more defined lines and create sort of like a grid, but not a uniform grid all over the icicles, which even just now looking at this already to me looks way, way, way more interesting. These little broken up patterns that are sort of in my icicles look really interesting to me. And at the same time, I feel like I want to push it a little bit more and explore the idea of adding color. I'm feeling a little timid at this point because I like what I've created, and sometimes when in instead of not liking what I've created so far, if I like what I've created so far, I feel very hesitant to move forward because, what if I move forward and do something that I end up not liking? And that can happen, especially when you're experimenting and trying something new. You never know. So I'm adding color. I'm a little bit timid about doing it, so I'm starting with a color that seems more relevant for the type of artwork I'm trying to create. If I'm creating abstract icicles, then I feel like I need to stick with whites. So, you kind of have to do, or I have to do, and I find I do this often, I do the thing that seems the easiest for me to do because oftentimes I need to push myself a little bit, especially if I'm feeling intimidated by the possibility of doing something that may or may not work out. Then I need to push myself. And if I'm going to do that, if I can do it gently by doing something that I feel more comfortable with, then I might be a little bit more apt to doing something a little bit more daring afterwards. After adding that pearl white, I started to feel a little bit more confident and I thought I want to push it even more and I'm going to add some gold. But I didn't want to go with, a very yellow gold. This is called, I think, bright pearl gold or something like that. I'll have it in my video description, of course. And it's not as yellow as star gold would be, and I think star gold would be a little bit too much for this painting. but I do feel like I want to push the envelope and make my icicles a little bit different. And, you know, when you're looking at snow or ice outside, the color of the snow or the ice will vary depending on what it is reflecting. So if it's a very beautiful sunny day, if you're looking at snow in a very objective way, you will probably see that there is the white, the snow is not exactly white. It's got a little bit of a golden hue to it. And icicles are the same. If the sunlight was hitting an icicle, it would probably be either reflected as, you know, that yellow sunlight from the side where the sun is hitting it. And so for me, it kind of made sense to go down this road. And again, this is an abstract painting, so there are no absolutes about what it needs to be. It needs to be exactly what I want it to be. And so I get to decide, and this is what I've decided to do. And honestly, right now, I think that gold is playing really, really nicely against those blues in the background. I'm loving the gold, I'm loving the pearl white, and then I'm looking at the painting, and even though there is quite a bit of dark value contrast with the black, I do still feel like it needs a little bit more, and I do feel like my icicles will look even more interesting if I add some darker blues in part of my grid. Continuing on with the idea of adding some more dark value contrast in my painting, I want to add more of that same blue in the background as well so that my abstract icicles can stand out a little bit more from the painting. And I have some details in the background there that are gonna sort of take a step back, and I'm okay with this. In fact, the ink that I used, once it's dry, once it's completely dry, it is relatively waterproof, and so some of those details will still show through this little wash of darker blue that I'm adding, and some of it will sort of fade into the background even more, and I think that's gonna create exactly the kind of effect I was hoping to create so that my icicles, my abstract icicles, stand out more. I love projects like this because they give me an opportunity to practice things that maybe I don't often have time to practice, and the idea of working with different gradients of color and shading, and again trying to make the shading vary in its gradient as it moves up and down the painting. I think that's something that I really enjoy doing. It's not something I practice very often, and so if I don't practice it very often, it becomes a little bit more challenging to do. But when I'm doing it here, I'm really finding it quite satisfying. I'm enjoying the process, and that just feels like this project can't be anything but successful because I'm feeling satisfied when I'm making these little brush strokes. There's nothing complicated about them, but I'm learning something, I'm practicing something, I'm finding enjoyment in my process. And that in itself, to me, means that my painting project was successful. I really love to learn. I love exploring new ideas. I love trying new things. I love doing things that sort of pull me out of my comfort zone. And the only way I can really do that is when I give myself permission to let go of the expectation of my project having to turn out a certain way. Initially, my goal for this little project was to create a video for you that would show you a different way of combining colors, would show you a way of creating an abstract representing something that's not necessarily exactly like what you would see in nature, but just the idea of exploring how to create something like an abstract painting of something that we see out there. And when I remove all expectations and all the pressure and my inner critic sort of gets quieter, it's easier for me to look at this little painting and really appreciate it. I love how these colors come together. I love that these little icicles almost look like they were torn from a piece of paper. I love how it all came together, and I love its simplicity. And really, when I'm less critical about it and when I don't take myself too serious because I'm worried that I'm not going to accomplish whatever it is I'm setting out to accomplish, it just all feels better. And so when I was able to look at this little painting in a different light, with more rested eyes and with less of an expectation on myself, I actually really, really love this painting, and I hope that you will have enjoyed this process as well. Thank you again for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!